Part 1. The truth about fat in the human body. There's one thing very few people say clearly when they talk about fat loss. Most of the fat you lose during weight loss does not leave your body through sweat, and it does not turn into muscle. Most of it actually leaves your body every time you breathe out. It sounds strange at first, but this is exactly how human biology works. And once you understand this, the way you look at fat loss will change completely. Before we talk about burning fat or losing weight, we need to step back and understand something more fundamental: what fat in the human body actually is. Many people imagine fat as soft lumps sitting under the skin. But at the biological level, fat is not just a chunk of fat. It is a highly efficient form of stored chemical energy. Inside the body, excess energy from food cannot stay in the form of muscle or sugar in the bloodstream forever. The body converts extra energy into a molecule called triglyceride. This is the main form of energy storage in the body. These triglyceride molecules are stored inside specialized cells called fat cells, also known as adipocytes. You can imagine each fat cell as a tiny fuel tank. When you eat more energy than your body needs, those tanks get filled. When the body needs energy, those tanks open and release fuel back into the system. This energy storage system evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to help humans survive periods when food was scarce. What is interesting is that fat in the body does not exist in just one place. There are two main types that science usually talks about. The first type is subcutaneous fat. This is the layer of fat located just beneath the skin, the kind you can feel when you pinch your stomach or your arm. This type mainly serves as energy storage and physical protection. But there is another type of fat that most people never see, and it is much more dangerous. This is visceral fat. This fat sits deep inside the abdominal cavity, surrounding important organs such as the liver, intestines, and pancreas. Unlike subcutaneous fat, visceral fat behaves almost like a small endocrine organ, constantly releasing chemical signals that can influence metabolism, blood pressure, and inflammation in the body. This is why visceral fat is strongly linked with conditions such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and metabolic disorders. But whether it is subcutaneous fat or visceral fat, at the molecular level, they are the same. They are both stored as triglycerides. Each triglyceride molecule consists of 3 fatty acids attached to one glycerol molecule. It may sound like dry chemistry, but this structure is actually the key to understanding what happens when the body begins to lose fat. When you eat food, the body breaks nutrients down into smaller molecules, such as glucose and fatty acids. If the amount of energy coming in exceeds what the body needs at that moment, the liver begins converting those molecules into triglycerides. These triglycerides are then transported through the bloodstream and delivered into fat cells for storage. From a biological perspective, this is an incredibly intelligent system. Imagine your body as a city that always has to prepare for difficult days ahead. When energy is abundant, the city builds more storage warehouses. Those warehouses are your fat cells. They exist to make sure that when energy becomes scarce, the body still has fuel to function. The problem is that in the modern world, energy is rarely scarce. Food is everywhere, while physical activity has dropped dramatically as a result. These energy warehouses keep expanding. Fat cells do not only increase in number, they also grow larger as they store more triglycerides. This is one reason why many people find fat loss difficult. It is not because the body is working against you. It is because the body is doing exactly what it evolved to do: protect stored energy. Once you understand this, something important becomes clear. Fat is not something that mysteriously sticks to your body. It is stored energy in chemical form. And if it is energy, then according to the laws of biology and physics, it must eventually be used. And this is where the story becomes interesting. When the body needs energy, for example, when you walk, exercise, or even sit and work for long hours without eating, those fat cells begin opening their storage tanks. Triglycerides are broken apart. Fuel is released, and the body starts using the energy that was stored earlier. But when this process happens, an intriguing question appears. If fat is chemical energy and the body is using it, where do those fat molecules actually go in the end? Most people have never thought about that question. But the answer to it is the key to understanding how the body truly loses fat. And as we go deeper into that biological mechanism, you will discover a surprising truth. Most of the fat you lose does not leave your body through the gym. It leaves your body through every breath you exhale. Part 2. How the body actually burns fat. Once you understand that body fat is stored energy, the next question becomes simple but important. How does the body unlock that stored energy? Fat inside the body is stored mainly as triglycerides inside fat cells. These molecules remain locked away until the body needs fuel. When your body begins to require energy and there is not enough incoming fuel from food, a biological signal is triggered. Hormones such as adrenaline and glucagon begin sending a message to fat cells that it is time to release stored energy. At this moment, a process called lipolysis begins. Lipolysis is the biological mechanism that breaks triglycerides apart. Each triglyceride molecule is split into two components, glycerol and free fatty acids. Once this happens, those fatty acids leave the fat cell and enter the bloodstream. They are now available as fuel. But fat cannot produce energy on its own. It must be processed by the cells that need energy. The bloodstream transports these fatty acids to tissues such as skeletal muscle, the heart, and the liver. Inside these cells are tiny structures called mitochondria, often described as the power plants of the cell. Inside the mitochondria, fatty acids go through a metabolic pathway called beta oxidation. During this process, the fatty acid chains are gradually broken down into smaller molecules called acetyl-CoA. These molecules then enter another pathway known as the Krebs cycle. Through a series of chemical reactions, energy stored in those molecules is finally converted into ATP, the usable energy currency of the body. This entire chain of reactions is what people casually call burning fat. But nothing is literally burning. What is happening is a controlled biochemical oxidation process that releases energy for the body to use. One detail is especially important here. Fat oxidation requires oxygen. Without oxygen, this process cannot run efficiently. That is why activities that rely on steady oxygen supply, such as walking, cycling, or moderate aerobic exercise, are very effective at increasing fat utilization. Another important point is that the body rarely uses only one fuel source. During most daily activities, the body uses a mixture of fat and carbohydrates. The proportion changes depending on intensity. Lower intensity movement tends to rely more on fat oxidation, while higher intensity effort shifts toward carbohydrate use because it can produce energy faster. But regardless of the mix, the underlying principle remains the same. When the body needs energy and the demand exceeds what is immediately available from food, it begins releasing stored fuel. Fat cells open their storage. Fatty acids travel through the bloodstream. Mitochondria process them. And chemical energy becomes usable energy. This is the biological system that has allowed humans to survive for thousands of years. Long before modern nutrition science existed, the body already had a built-in energy management system designed to store fuel when food was abundant and release it when energy was required. And once this process begins, something remarkable happens to those fat molecules. They do not simply disappear. They follow a precise chemical path that eventually leads to a surprising destination. Part 3. Where fat actually goes when you lose it. Now, we arrive at the part that surprises almost everyone. Once fat leaves the fat cell and begins moving through the body as fuel, the next question becomes unavoidable. If those triglycerides are broken down and used for energy, where do the atoms that made up that fat actually go? Most people assume the answer is simple. They think fat somehow melts away, or that it turns directly into heat, or maybe that it becomes muscle. None of those explanations are correct. In reality, fat loss follows a strict chemical path, and every atom has to end up somewhere. To understand this, we go back to what a fat molecule actually is. A triglyceride is made primarily of 3 elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. When fatty acids enter the mitochondria and go through beta oxidation, those atoms do not disappear. They are rearranged through a long chain of metabolic reactions. During these reactions, the carbon atoms are gradually converted into carbon dioxide, while the hydrogen atoms combine with oxygen to form water. These byproducts are then removed from the body through normal biological processes. This idea was explored clearly in a study published in the British Medical Journal in the year 2014 by researchers Ruben Meerman and Andrew Brown. The researchers traced the path of atoms during fat metabolism and calculated what happens when body fat is oxidized. Their findings were striking. When a person loses 10 kilograms of body fat, approximately 8.4 kilograms leave the body as carbon dioxide through breathing, while about 1.6 kilograms leave as water through sweat, urine, and other bodily fluids. In other words, most of the fat you lose literally leaves your body through your lungs. This means every time your body oxidizes fat for energy, the carbon atoms that were once stored in your fat cells are eventually carried away in the air you exhale. It sounds strange because we rarely think of breathing as part of weight loss. But from a biochemical perspective, breathing is exactly how the body removes the carbon that was stored in fat molecules. That does not mean you can simply breathe more and lose fat. The oxidation process still requires energy demand inside the body. The mitochondria must be actively converting fatty acids into energy before those carbon atoms can be released as carbon dioxide. But it reveals something important about the nature of fat loss. Fat loss is not about melting fat away. It is not about sweating it out. It is not about crushing fat cells in a workout. Fat loss is a metabolic oxidation process. Fat molecules are broken down. Their energy is extracted for biological work, and their atoms are carried out of the body through carbon dioxide and water. Once you see fat loss through this chemical lens, many common myths start to fall apart. There is no special exercise that directly burns belly fat. There is no shortcut that bypasses metabolism. The body follows the same biochemical rules every time. And those rules lead us to the most practical question of all. If fat loss is controlled by metabolic processes inside the body, what conditions actually make those processes happen more effectively? Part 4. How to activate the body's fat-burning system. Now that we understand what fat is, how it is released, and where it ultimately goes, the final question becomes practical. If fat loss follows clear biological rules, what conditions allow this system to work efficiently? The first condition is energy balance. The human body is governed by the basic laws of thermodynamics. Energy cannot disappear. It can only be stored or used. If the amount of energy coming into the body from food consistently exceeds the energy the body uses, the excess will be stored as triglycerides inside fat cells. But when the opposite happens, When the body's energy demand becomes greater than the energy entering from food, the body must begin releasing stored fuel. Lipolysis increases. Fatty acids leave fat cells, and the oxidation process begins. This is why every scientifically validated fat loss strategy eventually comes back to one principle: creating a sustained energy deficit. The second factor is movement and metabolic demand. When muscles contract, they require energy. At first, the body uses readily available fuels such as glucose and glycogen. But as activity continues, the body increasingly relies on fatty acids released from fat tissue. Aerobic activities such as walking, cycling, swimming, or steady running create a continuous demand for oxygen, which allows mitochondria to oxidize fatty acids efficiently. This is why consistent daily movement plays such a powerful role in long-term fat reduction. It increases the amount of energy the body must produce, and therefore increases the need to mobilize stored fuel. The third factor involves hormonal signals. Hormones act like messengers that control when fat cells open their storage tanks. High levels of insulin, which occur after frequent eating or high energy intake, signal the body to store energy. In contrast, hormones such as adrenaline, glucagon, and growth hormone promote the release of stored fuel. This is why periods without food, physical activity, and proper metabolic balance can all influence how easily the body accesses fat stores. The fourth factor is often underestimated: sleep and stress regulation. Chronic stress elevates cortisol levels, and prolonged cortisol elevation can disrupt metabolic balance, increase appetite, and encourage fat accumulation around the abdomen. Sleep deprivation also alters hormones that regulate hunger and energy use. When the body is consistently short on sleep, metabolic efficiency drops and fat regulation becomes more difficult. In other words, fat metabolism is not controlled by exercise alone. It is influenced by the entire biological environment of the body. When these conditions align, something remarkable happens. The body begins operating exactly the way it was designed to operate. Stored triglycerides are released. Fatty acids travel through the bloodstream. Mitochondria oxidize them for energy. And the carbon atoms that once formed fat molecules are eventually carried away as carbon dioxide through breathing. Fat loss, therefore, is not about forcing the body to do something unnatural. It is about creating the biological conditions that allow the body's existing energy system to function properly. Once you see fat through the lens of biology, the mystery disappears. Body fat is simply stored energy in chemical form. When energy intake exceeds energy demand, that energy is stored inside fat cells as triglycerides. When the body needs energy, those molecules are broken apart, processed in mitochondria, and converted into usable fuel. The atoms that once formed those fat molecules do not vanish. Most of them leave the body as carbon dioxide when you breathe out, while the rest leave as water. Every step of this process follows the same biochemical pathways that scientists have studied for decades in physiology and biochemistry. Understanding this changes the conversation around fat loss. It shifts the focus away from gimmicks and quick fixes and towards something much more powerful, working with the biology of the human body instead of fighting against it. The human body is not confused. It follows clear chemical rules. And when those rules are understood, fat loss stops being a mystery and becomes a predictable biological process driven by energy balance, movement, metabolic signals, and time.